Alright guys, so in this video I want to show you how to easily create a component with the CLI, with the command line interface, rather than manually creating the files like we did and adding the stuff to app.module. We can have that stuff done for us. So I'm going to stop the server with Control C and just clear this out. And then what we can do is we can do ng generate component, and then we actually want to put it inside the components folder. So we want to say component slash, and I want a users component, okay, users plural. Now it'll automatically create the users folder for us and all the files inside of it, so we don't have to specify all the files or anything. Now we could run this, but there's a shorter way. We can actually abbreviate this. We could do ngg component, and then we could even make this even shorter, and we could do nggc and then the components and then the name of the folder we want to create. Alright, now by default this is going to create a TS file, an HTML file, and a CSS file, just like we have for our user component. It'll also create a spec.ts file for testing, and we're not going to get into testing, so I'm going to add a flag here to not create that file, and that's -- spec equals false. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this command and see what happens. Alright, so if we look up here in components, you can see it created a users folder, and it created our TS file, HTML file, and CSS file. Another thing that it did is it added to app.module this line here, so it imported our component. Remember how we did that manually for our user component? That actually did it itself, and it also added it down here into declarations, so we don't actually have to do anything here. It does it for us. Also, if we open up the TS file, you'll see it gives us just a basic shell, so stuff that we manually typed in for the user component, it did automatically. Alright, it also created an HTML file, which is just a paragraph with whatever the name of the component is and works. That's what it puts by default, and then just a blank CSS file. Now, one thing you might notice that's different about this than the one that we created is it brings in this OnInit, and then it says implements OnInit, and then has a function or a method called ngOnInit. So this is what's called a lifecycle method, and this runs automatically when the component is initialized, just like the constructor does. Alright, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, let's see, we're going to go into our main app component HTML file, and we're not going to use the user app for a little bit. I'm going to change this to app users so that we display our new component. So let's save that, and then let's run our server with ngserve, and then that should replace what we have here with our new component. Alright, so we get users works because that's what's in the users component HTML file. Alright, now as I said, ngOnInit will run automatically, so if I say console.log, and in here we'll say init and save, you'll see that that ran. You can see it's logging down here. So this is actually what you want to use to create your for instance, if you do like an AJAX call or something through a service and you want to fill your properties, this is where you would do it. The constructor is more used for dependency injection, so to bring in services and stuff like that, you would inject it here, and we'll get into that later. So if we go back to our user component, the TS file, this that we did here where we assigned all the values to this .user, this should actually be done in the ngOnInit. Now you can do it in the constructor. It's not going to break it or anything, but it's recommended, and it's just the common standard to use ngOnInit. So what we can do is we can bring it in. We'll go up here and we'll say OnInit, and then just like we saw in the new component, we can say implements OnInit, and we get this error here because it's looking for an ngOnInit function or method, which we don't have yet. So we're going to create that right under the constructor. So ng OnInit. And then we want to just bring everything that we have here in the constructor into the initializer. All right, we'll save that. And then just to make sure that it still works, let's just go to our main app component and show our user component just to make sure that still works. Okay, so it works. So I'm going to just go ahead and put the S back so we show our new users component. And we can go ahead and close up the user component now that we have everything in ng OnInit where it should be. I mean, you could still use the constructor. A lot of people do, but it's just best practice to use the actual initializer. That's what it's for. All right, so we've covered pretty much all the basics of components. What I want to do in the next section is I want to start to look at templates and using things like directives. We want to be able to loop through properties with something called ng-for. We want to be able to use conditionals in our templates using ng-if. I also want to look more into data binding. I want to look at property binding and also class and style binding. There's something called pipes, so there's a lot more to get into. We just covered the basics of components, properties, methods, string interpolation, and interfaces. All right, so let's continue on with the next section.